We are on. Welcome, Jane Hardwicke Collings, my beautiful teacher from 7 years ago, my muse. It's such an honor to connect with you today and to finally be recording a pregnancy podcast. I'm now 35 weeks, I think, 35 weeks pregnant, and I've wanted to do a pregnancy series this whole pregnancy, and it just has not happened. Life has been full. So I'm just so honored to finally connect with you again and record some beautiful goodness around the shamanic dimensions of pregnancy. Thank you, Jane, for
Oh,
coming on.
thank you, Holia. It's such a treat and a pleasure to see you in your ripeness.
Yes, I'm feeling very full bloom, definitely, and
Mm.
very excited. Last time, well, we've connected a little bit since, but I did the 4 seasons journey with Jane when I was freshly pregnant with my first child. I did my vision quest when I was 6 or 7 weeks pregnant and had a bleed and wasn't sure if I had gone through a miscarriage or not, and it was just really powerful to go through that experience of questioning my body and questioning the process, but then being able to trust the process and have that space held by you, Jane, which I gained so much wisdom from that I was able to take into the birth process. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it was an honor to be with you in that huge time.
It was a huge time, definitely, definitely. And so here we go again, and I'm coming to your Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy workshop next weekend in Sydney. Didn't realize it was next weekend. Time is flying by.
And you'll be very pregnant.
Yes, I'll be very pregnant then. And I will launch this podcast straight away to promote this workshop. And yeah, I'd love to know what else you're up to. You're always doing amazing, beautiful, powerful things. I really look up to you and yeah, the work that you do for healing the feminine in our cultural patriarchal times. There's a huge shift that's been happening, and I feel like you're a huge part of that. So thank you for everything you
Oh,
do, Jane.
thank you, Holia. And so are you. You know, you're out there leading a group of women to be more empowered, and it's just so great to watch what you're doing as well.
Isn't it beautiful? It's such a powerful time to be alive in a way. You just think,
Mm.
talking about the things that we can talk about through birth and with menstruation and menopause, it just was not spoken about 20 years ago, right? Things have changed
Exactly.
very quickly, very
Yeah.
quickly.
Mm.
Very exciting.
In the nick of time.
In the nick of time. Has to happen now.
Yes.
We can't go anymore. Yeah.
No.
Can't go the other way.
Hopefully we've hit that and now we're doing that. Yeah.
That's what it feels like. It definitely
Mm.
feels like that.
Mm.
Like even through my work, I have 18, 19-year-olds coming for womb healings that are just wanting to enhance their creative energy and connect with their womb space. Like that just
Oh.
wasn't heard of when I was that age, not that long
Mm.
ago, really. So
That's wonderful.
it's very beautiful.
Mm.
So yeah, since we're in the pregnancy realms here with this Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy workshop, podcast workshop next weekend. Don't know where to start. Well, I love your saying, Jane, you have the birth you need to have to learn the lessons you need to learn to bring you closer to wholeness, if I've repeated that correctly.
More or
So
less.
yes. So I really feel that that pregnancy is this shamanic time where we're really connected to, we can be and we are connected to many levels of healings. The hormones help that. And while we're pregnant, we're actually conditioning our child. There's new research around that and the work of epigenetics, which gives us mothers such a huge responsibility. And I've heard, a lot of women shy away from that and feel that that's too much of a responsibility and a burden. But my Virgo self feels that such an honor to have that. And of course, we're not perfect, but we can still try our best and have that intention of healing throughout the pregnancy journey and working on the many layers of healing available to us and in preparation for the birth portal, because whatever needs to show up in the birth portal will show up.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
Jane,
yeah.
you've been a home birth midwife for 30 years and a creatrix, wise woman, way shower for many years. Well, I did my training with you, must be 7 years ago now, and you're doing it way before that. So you've been in this realm for a long, long time.
I'm one of the grandmas now.
Yes, a beautiful grandmother. Lucky, lucky children.
So that
Yes.
idea of having the birth, you have the birth you need to have to teach you what you need to learn about yourself to take you to the next place on your journey to wholeness. So the way that perspective works is if we understand that everything that happens in our lives has a purpose and a teaching, and if we live the story that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and that life is a school, so to speak. I mean, much more than that, of course, but that we're learning as we go. And the thing about pregnancy is that we don't just grow a baby, we grow ourselves into the mother the baby has come for. So that may require a shift or 10. That may require an upgrading of our mindset. It may require a letting go of fears. It may require soul investigation, because birth is not a random event in our lives. How we give birth is like a culmination of our life thus far. It's like a readout of our mindset, our beliefs, attitudes, and fears. And we inherit a lot of that. So often during birth and the other major rites of passage, menarche, birth, and menopause, often those are the times in our lives where we can see and experience and feel our red thread or mother line female generational trauma play out. So our rites of passage are one of the places where that happens. And that's not because that's a bad thing. That's because that's a opportunity for healing. And so when we come to a rite of passage, so think about birth, obviously, because that's what we're talking about, but we come to a fork in the road. And one way is the usual way, the same old way, the way it always happens to me or in my family. And that so often is the wounded way, but we don't even know that. It's just the way it always happens. The other fork in the road is the healed way. But to even know there's a healed way, you have to realize you're on the wounded way. And then you need to do the inner work that bridges the two, that sets you off on the healed journey, which doesn't mean everything all of a sudden is going to go your way. It means that you will be bringing consciousness to the decisions that you make and awareness to your thoughts and fears and beliefs. So in the way that we grow the baby and we also grow the mother the baby's come for, there's a lot of soul crafting, as my teacher Janine Parvati Baker called it, growth of the individual, development, personal development and growth that happens in pregnancy. Like, it's huge. And so there can often be like a revisitation of all the things you thought you'd figured out, just so you could go next level in your understanding or your perspective or whatever. And the way that we can find the teachings in our birth experiences is if we don't judge ourselves or birth. Like, there's no good birth or bad birth. There's no successful birth or a failed birth. Like, that's all just the way our culture looks at things, right? There's just birth. And within the birth, there are the teachings. And so often they are the very next thing one needed to know about oneself. And I would dare say, in preparation for being the mother this baby's come for. So at birth, we don't just birth a baby, we birth ourselves as the mother this baby's come for. And so the teaching of the birth, the lesson we learn from birthing the baby, is one of the qualities, the primo quality we need to bring to mothering the baby. And now, as a mother of adult children, I see this does not stop. So it's a continual process. So birth as a teacher and our children as the ongoing teachers. So this enables us to pull together, this perspective enables us to pull together our life before now, because one rite of passage leads to the next. So the rites of passage that will be, say, using you as an example in your ripeness, the rites of passage that will be influencing and impacting this next one you're coming to is your previous birth with your now 6-year-old, I can't believe that, and any other pregnancies that you've had, and then your experience with your menstrual cycle, which was sort of choreographed by your experience of your menarche, your first period, and then any childhood trauma you experienced and the default behaviors you developed as a little person to cope, especially about your relationship with authority, and then your own birth. And then often with these rites of passage, so it's not just the moment the baby comes out that holds the biggest teaching. So for example, in previous pregnancies, because you have to remember what you learned from the previous pregnancy to bring it to the next one, pregnancy and birth, that to bring it to the next one so you don't have a repeat performance to learn the same thing again, right? So, and sometimes in a birth, let's focus on birth as a rite of passage, the biggest teaching might be in the conception. You know, like if somebody's having a journey with around their fertility and things are just not happening when they want or whatever, or there's infertility, that could be the biggest part of the whole process. Or if somebody's sick in pregnancy or, you know, have some huge things happen during pregnancy, that could be the biggest part of the story. Or the birth, obviously, but also the postnatal time. So if somebody's had postnatal depression, that could be the biggest thing. So obviously we look at the conception, the conception to postnatal as the whole experience. And it's so significant to, I believe that preparing for birth, one can be best served by doing their previous rites of passage healing. So understanding how you were born. Now, how we're born doesn't mean we're going to give birth how we were born necessarily, although I see that happens a lot. But our birth imprint, and this is the birth imprint that we're co-creating with our baby as well, our birth imprint plays out all the time. It's how we do process. It's how we are in the creative act. It's how we manage ourselves through a process. And then our menarche, our first period, so this is our initiation into womanhood and our fertility, and whatever happens there teaches us on a subliminal level, which means we don't even realize we're being taught. We are enculturated, which is just a nice way of saying brainwashed, by how we feel through the experience, how we're treated. It teaches us how our culture values, in the case of birth and pregnancy, how it values motherhood, and therefore how we're supposed to behave to be accepted as a mother in our culture. Now, all we have to do is look at the stats to see what the setups are here, and it's not good. And it doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to be forever, because there's women like you who are reclaiming this and doing it in a healed and conscious way, instead of just slotting into the conveyor belt maternity care system that's people say the system's broken. System's not broken. The system's working for itself, right? And it's working, but it's not working for the clientele, for the mothers, the families, the babies, which is so sad. So the inner work that we can do in preparation for birth can be a lot about dealing with our inner child, our wounded inner child. Everyone's got a wounded inner child. And reclaiming our menarche, and therefore our relationship with our body. Because at menarche, we're initiated into womanhood, as I said, but what happens there is that we become the woman that we become based on the experience we have, which sadly, commonly is like, just hide it, hide your period,
Shame.
shame. So we're basically initiated into menstrual shame at our menarche. And menstrual shame leads to birth shame, and birth shame leads to menopause shame. So we're in this shame, cycles of shame. And when there's shame at menarche, the sad effects are that menstrual shame leads to body shame. And body shame leads to all manner of wounded behaviors, including self-harm, eating disorders, and risky and dangerous sexual decision-making. And I've got an incredible quote here from Sharon Maloney, a Queensland women's healthcare practitioner who did a PhD on menstrual shame. So she said that menstrual shame is one of the organizing principles of the patriarchy to maintain the oppression of women.
Yes.
And what she says, let me read this, is about
Oof.
how that then impacts birth. She said, menstrual shame engenders the perception of female physiology and womanhood as inherently flawed. And that menstrual shame is a key factor that predisposes women to approach birth feeling fearful, disempowered, and vulnerable to intervention, which I would add will lead to birth trauma. And so what she found in her research is that redesignating menstruation as a spiritual phenomena, so changing your perspective and seeing menstruation as a spiritual phenomena, spiritual practice, that enables women to dismantle their menstrual shame and connect with their female spirituality, and then give birth fearlessly and powerfully. And she adds that for some, the profound spirituality of birth transforms their understanding of menstruation.
Oh, you're going to have to screenshot that and send that to me, Jane. Wow.
Okay, yeah.
Wow. Full power. And of course, like we can look back, it's quite hard to find this information, but I had a big day of research and study and found all these quotes that anthropologists had published around ancient cultures and how they revered the menstrual cycle as sacred. And revered the woman as sacred during that time. And then obviously, I'm guessing, you know, through the witch hunts and the rise of the patriarchy, that's how to suppress the feminine, go straight to the menstrual cycle, suppress that, make that be seen as dirty and impure. And that's the cascade of here we are. We're healing it now. We're definitely healing it now. But
but that's
and
a new thing, right? Like
that's exactly, it's so recent. We just mentioned that, how 20 years ago you can't really speak about this kind of stuff to our great grandparents. They'd be horrified. But our daughters, our daughters are being born into this new realm of honoring their menstrual cycle and empowered birth. And even the birth realm, how much has that changed in the last little, I had a beautiful home birth with my first, and that was still pretty unheard of. And now all of a sudden women are free birthing, wild pregnancies, no one telling them how to do the things. Obviously there's still the polarity, but this empowerment of the feminine is really rising. And women are trusting their bodies and trusting the process, rather than handing their power over as much, checking themselves into hospital. And that's why my own birth was so traumatic. My mum had no education. There was no resources back then that she was aware of, at least, and just in fear checked herself into hospital and had all the things done. And I had a really traumatic incoming into the world. And thanks to Jane, I was able to process that. I think it was only maybe the night before I went into labor with my daughter, and I felt that fork in the road that you mentioned. It was, am I either going to relive this trauma, which for me was not just this lifetime. I had a lot of past life flashbacks of a lot of birth trauma and maternal death and all sorts of horrible things in my past lives. And then there was this other road where there was this really healing, empowering birth. And I was sitting in the edge of that fork. Which way is it going to go? And for me, the biggest thing for that process was surrendering and not controlling, and trusting the process. And I learned that lesson through being with you on the vision quest in that time where I thought I was having a miscarriage, and I just had to surrender. If this is the process I need to go through, then this is what I need to go through. There's nothing I can do except for surrender and relax and trust.
Powerful. So good.
Yes. Oh.
And not necessarily happiness making. Like,
no.
It might not be what you want, but it's what's happening.
Yes, what we want is something that we've pre-conceptualized in our minds. What we need is what happens, I guess. It's just that, and
Mm,
then just again, surrender and trust process.
mm, exactly. And also there's that whole concept about being with what is, and that's going to be whatever's arising during pregnancy. That is a preparation for the birth. So in the way of your story there about the bit of blood and what's going to happen and all of that, like it, you could go and have tests, you could try and wish it away, you could do whatever you could to stop what was happening, but actually what is required is to be with what is happening.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I'm just going to pause it for a second. My sister-in-law is
Yeah.
vacuuming upstairs. Great timing. And so we just had to pause the recording for a moment there. We wanted to move on to birth trauma, and we've got a current inquiry into the system, and Jane's been an advocate for this change that needs to happen in the system, and investigations into the birth trauma that has been happening for quite some time now in the system, the miscare of women. And yeah, I'd love to hear what's happening with that, Jane, and yeah, what we can do to be aware of this, and what women can also do to, I guess, be empowered and to protect themselves when they have chosen to birth in the system. I guess that's a really big thing, is to take home some tools.
Mm. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter on your place of birth with birth trauma as an outcome,
Exactly. Yeah,
you could have a home birth, you could have a free birth and still have
of course.
birth trauma. And birth trauma is not a diagnosis, it's what the mother or the father, the partner, the people, like the midwife, the doctor, the support people, the doulas, everybody can experience birth trauma. And so if you're not giving birth, it's vicarious, so by witnessing or being part of it. But the birth trauma is something that the individual decides they have, not somebody
Yes.
diagnosing it,
Yes.
Yeah. So just a little bit of a look at what's going on in birth right now. Now, the statistics that come out about the intervention and birth rates and place of birth and how the babies come out are always a bit delayed because it takes a while to gather all the data.
Process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the current information, which is from the Mothers and Babies report, is information post-COVID. So it's after COVID finished. I mean, did it ever finish and did it ever get back to normal, and what's normal anyway? However, those results there that we've got are 2021, and there's a 38% cesarean rate. So that's 1 in 3 women having cesareans. So that's like double plus than the number that the World Health Authority says you could expect. So the World Health Authority says that there are about 10 to 15% of women who may need a cesarean for usually predisposing conditions or maybe an emergency. But now we're up to 38%. And only 50% of women have babies out of their vaginas, like normal vaginal birth. So there's the 38% cesareans, 50% normal birth, and the rest of that is made up with vacuum extraction and forceps deliveries. So instrumental and cesareans are half, and normal vaginal birth half. And
there's also, sorry, Jane, in those stats, the what do they call it when you go into labor naturally? The stats of going into labor naturally are around like 15-20% something.
41% spontaneous labor.
Bit better than one of the local hospitals here then I've
well, every hospital will be very different, and because that's
Yes.
going to make up the thing. Like, some hospitals have 80% cesarean rate, which is do your homework, right? The two biggest decisions that we make that influence the outcome are the place of birth and the primary caregiver. So there's heaps more intervention in private hospitals with private obstetricians.
Yes.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that in choosing one thing that's going to mean that you're going to have it, because
No.
it's much more than that. It's remember the culmination of your life thus far. You have the birth you need to have, and the setup is that you get yourself where you need to get yourself to have that.
Yes.
So there's 34% of women have an induction of labor. So this is the total, and in some there's going to be more, like you said. So that's 1 in 3 have an induction of labor, 1 in 3 have cesareans, and 1 in 3 experience birth trauma. But they're not the same 1 in 3, right? It's just that that's the stats. So the thing about birth trauma is no one will diagnose. I mean, there will be people diagnosing it, and that's fine, but it's the experience of it. So remember, well, now we're having so much more information and education about trauma. It's the big thing now, thank goodness. And we've learned that the body holds the score. So everything is recorded in your body. And what we're being taught now is that trauma isn't the thing that happens to you. It's what you're left with, what's in your body. So it's the results of it. So because one woman can have the same birth, they can have the same birth experience, but how they're treated is going to be the thing that's going to impact whether they have birth trauma or not. So if somebody is fully supported,
processes as well. 2 women can have exactly the same experience, and one could feel really empowered, and the other can, have trauma from that. Yeah.
Or somebody they have the same experience, but they're held really well in it, as opposed to treated badly. Which there's no excuses for that.
Yes.
So 1 in 3 are the stats for birth trauma, and then out of those, that 1 in 3, 1 in 10 of them have PTSD from the birth experience. And that's like, that's like a big process, right? You're left with it for a long time, and it's a whole another thing.
And these are just the ones that have been like diagnosed and actually put through this process of being processed onto paper.
Counted. Exactly.
That's it.
There'll be more.
Oh yeah.
And we kind of see part of it is that we're groomed, to borrow that word from other horrible places, but we're groomed for intervention.
Yeah.
Oh, baby's looking a bit big, or your previous birth, blah 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 blah.
Yes.
Which takes me to the next really significant stat around birth trauma, is that 70% of birth trauma, so that's kind of like what, 2/3 more? More, actually. 3/4, say.
Not good at that math stuff.
And you're pregnant, you're thinking about other things. 70% of birth trauma is what we call iatrogenic, which means it's caused by the doctors and the midwives. And what that means is it's how they do what they have to do. They got to do stuff, right? But it's the way they do it and the way they speak to the women or don't. Like, So I'm part of a not-for-profit called Hygeia Health, which is like the not-for-profit wing of the School of Shamanic Womancraft. Beautiful. And our focus is on education around birth trauma, healing birth trauma, preventing birth trauma, all of that kind of thing. And so what we're focusing on is this 70% that's caused by the practitioners, because that shouldn't be such a thing. So we can eradicate 70% of the birth trauma simply by, what I think, supporting the midwives and the doctors. Like, no midwife and doctor goes to work wanting to do harm.
Of course,
like,
they want to
help. They want to help.
Role.
They're doing their job. They've trained a long time, whatever. They might be tired. They might have their own children. They might be going through menopause. They might be having a heavy period, all the whatever. But 70% of birth trauma can be prevented. And this is the approach that Hygeia Health is taking, is to work on that. Now, it's not just going to be about helping the actual birth practitioners, although I think that's key, because what we've found out recently through further investigation, particularly around Birth Trauma Awareness Week, which happened earlier in August, I think, July maybe. Anyway, we, up in the Northern Rivers, did a public panel about birth trauma. It was a free event for the community, and 500 people showed up.
Wow.
So that's significant, you know. And there were some midwives and doctors and alternative healthcare practitioners and doulas all talking about birth trauma. And then there was some questions and whatnot. And then there were some workshops in the local hospital there about trauma-informed maternity care, which actually doesn't exist yet, you know. So we're at this cusp where the information is out there in the other specialties, so to speak. So psychology, psychiatry, and helping people to identify trauma and be with it and heal it. So now we can borrow all of that and bring it into the birth space.
Yes.
And we know that it's all about, a big part of what's going on is affected by the state of our nervous system.
Yes.
So think of yourself as a busy midwife or a busy obstetrician, and you know you probably didn't eat breakfast because you were on call and whatnot, and you haven't slept, and you've got your family, something happening with your family, and then there's these births and stuff happens. You're not going to be on your game. You can't be. Nobody can be.
Not the best version of yourself at all.
No, which is what's required, right?
Yes.
Especially when you're doing such important things. And so we need to help them regulate their nervous systems by teaching them how to do it. And this is a new thing, you know, like obstetricians who are in practice now will never have learned about birth trauma. There is no module in medical training about birth trauma. So that's all going to happen now, which is fantastic.
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
the inquiry that's happening is hugely also, obviously, with the focus on the mothers and whoever else has had the trauma. The biggest thing is to acknowledge it and to support them in whatever way they need to be supported to recover from it. And it, you know, it's a significant thing. So I feel like we are actually in the birth world here in Australia, and this inquiry that's happening is specifically New South Wales, but it will be the beginning of whatever needs to happen next. And they had nearly 5,000 submissions from women and people who were reporting an experience they had that was traumatic. Like that can't be ignored, right?
No.
And there've been public hearings, so that has happened last week. There were 2, and there's more coming up. And this is where people are actually being interviewed by the panel of parliamentarians that have gathered around to be part of the group that will come do all the hearings and read all the submissions and then come up with recommendations. So that's all happening as we speak. And their recommendations will come out, I think, in February next year. But the biggest thing that's being revealed is that there is no trauma-informed maternity care that everybody receives. So when I was training as a midwife, which is back in 1983, so quite a long time ago, we learned that we needed to be mindful about the statistics of childhood sexual abuse. So, you know, 2 to 3 in 5 people have experienced childhood sexual abuse. So, and birth can be something that will bring that up.
Yes.
Not always, but sometimes it can be a time where it reminds them of their previous experience and then they freeze or whatever they do. So the teaching was that we needed to treat every woman as if she'd been sexually abused as a child, in case she had, because, you know, who knows, right? They might not even know, right? So what that looked like or looks like is asking permission.
Yes.
May I touch you?
Yes.
Is it okay if we do this now? And don't say things like spread your legs or lie on your back, you know, things that would trigger painful, terrifying, horrible memories. Yeah. So, but I don't think that everybody does that. But
no,
they should.
not from what I've heard. Definitely, that yeah, that should be it, it's just giving the woman some power to say yes or no and feel like she's got a choice. Where if a
Mm.
woman feels disempowered and she has to do something like that with such a sacred part of her body, that can be, yeah, triggering trauma even if it hasn't happened previously. Yeah,
Totally creating it. Yeah.
exactly.
Violation. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
women even call these things birth rape and
Yes.
obstetric violence. And
Yes.
what we're seeing is, you know, we all remember the Me Too
Mm,
movement, for want of a better word. This is now the Me Too birth trauma movement.
mm,
And
mm,
Hannah Darlin, who's a doctor of midwifery and one of the main researchers in the field of birth trauma, she was speaking at the hearing. And one of the things she said, which I hope just gets really repeated over and over and over again, is no means no,
mm,
except in birth,
mm. Yeah.
which is just
Gosh.
terrible, right?
Yeah.
Mm. And the submissions
Ah.
that are public now that everybody can read are so sad, so
Mm,
terrible, and preventable.
yeah.
All we need is kindness,
Yes.
respect, and gentleness. You
Yes.
know, you could have a emergency cesarean or an emergency forceps delivery or vacuum or whatever, and you could get through that experience as a
Mm.
mother if you were held gently.
Yes.
Everything's explained, your permission is
Mm-hmm.
requested, and you're not left feeling like you did something wrong or blamed or shamed.
Mm-hmm.
So, to my mind, there's absolutely no excuses for rudeness
Mm-hmm.
around birth. And sadly, there's a lot of it.
Mm.
But what the clue here is, if 70% of this birth trauma is iatrogenic, caused by the practitioners, they don't want to do harm, right? No one wants to do harm. But their nervous systems will be, you know, as soon
Mm.
as you go into fight or flight, which is what an animal does, right? And we're animals and we can't bypass our nervous system, right? If you can't do that. So if something happens to us that triggers our wounds, and everything does all the time, right? It doesn't matter how cool or clever or smart or in control you are. If your childhood trauma gets triggered, your childhood trauma gets triggered.
Yes.
And if your nervous system, so therefore your nervous system goes into fight or flight. And so imagine all these practitioners at birth with their nervous system in fight or flight. The first thing that happens in that case is your neocortex switches off.
Mm-hmm.
You can't think straight. So
Mm-mm.
they say they sound like a cranky parent.
Mm-hmm.
Had enough.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's not the place.
Yes. Yeah.
So even just helping them to feel supported in their nervous systems will make a
Yes.
big difference.
Yes.
Have they
Deep
even
breathing.
eaten?
Yes. Their own self-care, some deep breathing, mindfulness. Might sound a bit woo-woo, but it's hard to be in the fight and flight if you're actually breathing deep. And I guess it's their own triggers of, yeah, being triggered in that emergency situation.
Which people do. Like you can't not
Yes, of
be
course.
unless you
Yeah.
go into shutdown and just turn into a robot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
you've done it 100 million times and you do have
Mm.
a pattern you can slot into to just keep doing what you know you have to do. But expecting, like, I think the thing about our culture is that we've taken out the humanness.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we live in a culture of blame. So if
Mm.
something goes wrong, we've got to blame somebody. And what I would love to see happen is everybody taking responsibility for
Yes.
their lives. And that
Yes.
would be a really good thing, including women having babies. You know,
Of
take
course.
responsibility for your experience. Don't blame anybody. Like, yes, somebody did something or said something dumb or stupid and that was upsetting, but, you know, what's that in the bigger picture of your life? Is that the first time someone's spoken to you
Mm.
like that? I doubt
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
What is that? You know, what's
Yes.
the setup in your life to have that experience? Because there'll be one.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. And that the birth portal is such a sensitive time as well to bring awareness to these practitioners that, yeah, everything that is said and done is going that deeper level. It's different if someone says something to you in the street, or something, someone says a certain thing to you while you're in the birth process. It's just, you're so open. And even reflecting back on my birth, it was a beautiful home birth, but there was still a few things said and done. And I felt that held in my womb space that I had to process and move through. And that made me aware, like, wow, if the extent of what birth trauma could mean for a lot of women, just the tiniest little thing can be such a big thing in that space.
Totally. So that's
Yeah.
the mindfulness, what you're saying. I once was midwife for a home birth where they didn't want me to say anything. So it was silence. And that gave me the opportunity to notice what I was going to say and then not say it. But what a way to hold that control, or not control, but the awareness that whatever you say is going to go deep in that mama and deep in that baby. So that's the mindfulness that's required, to listen to what you're saying and make the choice before you say it.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, such a sacred, sacred time. And what an honor to be a part of a birth process as well, to bring that, to come back to, to being able to witness this life come into the world. And yeah, I guess it's just so different when women, midwives, obstetricians have been to so many births, they lose that sense of sacredness, I guess, most of them.
Yeah, well, not everybody, but like the thing about it is that there's like a problem with the turf. There's a turf war going on. So
Good way to put it.
there's two birth practitioners. Like I'm not including doulas. Like obviously the doula comes with the mum, so to speak. So she's part of her crew. And then there's the midwives and the doctors. Now, midwives are trained in normal pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And normal has massive range, healthy, normal birth. Obstetricians are trained in abnormal conception, pregnancy, birth, and postnatal. That not so much postnatal, because it would be for the mother, but then the pediatricians come in for the baby. So a lot of obstetricians take on normal births when that's not their domain. They most probably haven't even seen a normal birth in their training. And sadly, a lot of midwives aren't even seeing any normal births in their training either. So, it's just getting lost, which is just tragic. But if we I think one of the biggest things that will probably come out of this birth trauma inquiry is something that we already know. There's already tons of studies all around the world to say this is the way to do it, and that is the continuity of care. So you have the one person that accompanies you, journeys with you all the way through pregnancy, birth, and into the postpartum time, until you're ready to say goodbye. And then they might hand you over to somebody else, but that realm. So what that looks like most commonly nowadays is that's what happens when people have home births. They have their midwife all the way through. And the studies show that the known carer has a major impact on the experience and the outcome. And so what I'm guessing reading between the lines, will come from this birth trauma inquiry is the way that looks in a hospital setting, which is called a midwifery group practice. And that's a bunch of midwives, like, I don't know what the numbers are, but they work together as a team, and you might get slotted into this team. So, the whole team, and maybe it's a team of 4, say. So you will see each of them or all of them through the pregnancy, and then whoever the 2 on call are for your birth are there, but you already know them because you've seen them, and then likewise after the birth. So, and currently midwifery group practices, or midwifery programs, I'm getting the words mixed up. Group. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah. Yeah, we do have Newcastle.
That's mainly for women in low risk situations, but everybody needs, and even like those in the so-called high risk would probably do even better to have their own known midwife all the way through. Some safety in knowing who's coming, who you're going to see or whatever. And primarily, so especially in the high risk, and I use that in inverted commas, right? Just using the language, I wouldn't use that, but that they need it more than anybody. And the problem is that in those sort of scenarios is they have to keep telling their story to the next new person that they see over and over and over again. So they don't get anywhere on their story. They're just going over and over and over to keep everybody up to date. When if they had the one person caring for them, they can advance.
That's right. Move through that. And that's, the high risk categories, you can be labeled as high risk very easily. Like previous cesarean, I guess they've all got different, bigger babies even, I've heard, or going overdue with your first baby that might have been 10 years ago. There's, the lines are quite easily crossed. So it's, there's so much room for improvement on so many levels. But of course, a woman's going to feel so much more comfortable in her birth process having the same midwife the whole way through. And of course she could be or not there because she's just been at another birth, but being familiar with the whole team, that's great. That definitely is a huge way to move forward. What other ways can we move forward for women that are listening to this, that are pregnant and choosing where to give birth and how to give birth, and potentially never given birth before or had a traumatic birth previously? Any words of wisdom? I know we did start with quite some words of wisdom, so let's maybe recap on that. And how can women prepare for birth?
Well, I think the missing piece in birth preparation is your inner work. It's kind of predictable what's going to happen, because if it's the culmination of your life thus far, then the fears and worries and issues that you've always had are going to be there again. Like, they don't go away because you're having a baby, they just actually get bigger. So the inner work, I feel, will help everybody understand why what's arising is arising. So what I mean by inner work is to look at everything that's happened in your life so far. So what family were you born into, and what did you grow up around, and therefore what did you come to expect? Like, if you grew up in I'm just going to choose an extreme, and a family that had a lot of aggression and violence even, then your nervous system will already be shot from that. So then you're in fight or flight. So you probably will go into fight or flight at any drop of the hat that reminds you of any of that. So to even remember that, to recall that, then you can think about what you will need to help you feel safe in your vulnerability, in that you will experience in pregnancy. Because as you said, in birth, as you said, the portal of birth, that's an open space. We can't be expected to protect ourselves in that space. We need protectors or guides or whatever. So the inner work to find out how you were born, like, that's key. You don't necessarily give birth how you were born, but it's a great piece of information to understand yourself, because and how you were born is not a curse. It's simply a pattern to come to understand, so you can work with it rather than be worked by it. And you did that in the Four Seasons journey by making a drum, birthing a drum, to figure out how your birth imprint plays out. And then to think about your childhood trauma and what that's left you with, and it will have left you with something. Triggers.
Of course.
And so, especially, as I said, have a think about your relationship with authority, because that'll show up somehow or other. And then your menarche, like, our experience with our menstrual cycle, and therefore our perspective of our body, is going to be one of the major impacts on how we give birth. So, like I read from Sharon Maloney's quote, birth. So menstrual shame can lead to birth shame. It can lead to high intervention in birth because of how menstrual shame has us think of our bodies and body processes as flawed.
Yes.
Birth is not flawed. Everybody's thinking about birth is dangerous. Like, there's a great quote by Harriet Hartigan, who it would be quite an old lady now. She was around in the early days of birth empowerment. She said, birth is as safe as life gets.
Yes. If it was
And,
dangerous, we wouldn't all be here.
exactly. Like the least likely way to die is at birth.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so birth is birth is not the problem. Look at the population on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of people being born,
That's
and
right.
it works. And like 80% of those births happen in third world countries with no medical help.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
birth is not the problem, and birth is nothing. There's nothing about birth we have to fix. What we need to do is approach it from a salutogenic perspective, which means a wellness, health-based perspective. We need to support the physiological process of birth, not take it over. You take it over and it ends in tears. Birth will not be controlled. She is a force of nature. Like imagine trying to tame a hurricane, like not possible. You can't tell the earthquake, just stop now. Like the birth force is a force of nature that we be best served by opening to and letting it move through us.
Surrendering.
So,
And not control it.
Yeah, in our preparation for birth, like one of the ways you can tell whether you're good at surrendering or not is to think about how you are sexually and what orgasms are like for you. Like if it's hard to surrender to have an orgasm, then, that might be an issue, because the same surrender you need to do to have an orgasm is the same surrender you need to do to have a baby. So orgasms can be good practice for letting go and surrendering too, with the objective being to stay in the zone. So what we need to do is create a situation, a circumstance, an environment that is best supportive of physiological birth, and that is to not disturb the mother. So let her be an animal, which is what we are,
Intuitive, instinctive, primal. She knows what to do.
Noise making, and half the problem with women around birth and birth trauma is they're looking after everybody else instead of going on the journey of birth, or they're worried about the noise they're making, or the shape of their body, or wee coming out, or poo coming out, or whatever, because we're so shamed by all of it. So get yourself in a situation where you can have an undisturbed birth, which will include things like not having people talk to you, not having people watch you, quiet, dark, no sharp sounds, just like drumming is great.
Yeah, drumming is amazing.
Just some sort of something that's no lyrics to loop into, and nobody bursting through the door and all of that kind of stuff. What the woman needs, so what you need to prepare is the environment in which you feel safe.
Yes.
And that could be a hospital labor ward, and that's fine. Wherever the mother feels safe is going to be the best place for her to have her baby. So a lot of inner inquiry, and I think an education around what physiological birth is, and therefore how you could create the environment that would best support that.
And trusting herself, trusting yourself. That's the thing, is handing our power away, thinking that someone else knows how to bring our baby earthside better than the woman knows. The woman is the most powerful and intuitive that she's ever been in her whole life. In that moment, she knows exactly what she needs to do to bring her baby earthside. So that trust in herself, the process, the physical body, trusting the baby, you're working together with your baby. It's a co-facilitation of this baby moving through your pelvis to come out, and just trusting is huge.
So filling oneself with positive birth stories, watching animals give birth, and watching videos of birth. There's so many more available these days,
isn't there? It's amazing
that you can watch, because probably what everybody's noticed when they get pregnant is that it's like everybody starts telling you their terrible birth stories. So the way to avoid that is to say, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but can you please just, I can't handle it now. Please don't tell me.
Yes. Yeah. Such a sensitive time. beautiful. Yeah, my daughter's been able to witness 2 physiological home births in her 6 years, which I've had
Oh,
mentioned, a midwife friend mentioned to me that's probably more physiological births than most obstetricians have seen. But to normalize birth, normalize the menstrual cycle and normalize birth, what a huge level of healing that is. Um,
totally.
yeah. So she gets
Good
to, this
on
will
you.
be her third birth that she gets to witness and be a part of, which is, yeah, exciting.
Wow.
Little midwife in the making.
Yay.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining us on the Temple of Shakti podcast. I can't wait to give you a big hug and see you in person next weekend
Mm.
as I'm entering the birth portal and really coming into that inward time after such a fast pregnancy. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, and thank you for everything that you're doing for paving the way and being a part of this huge movement and collective healing for the feminine through
Mm.
menstrual cycle, birth, and menopause as well. Sharing so many beautiful resources around menopause. So Jane's got a beautiful book called 10 Moons that she published quite some time ago, but it's a beautiful pregnancy book that you must have on your shelf as a pregnant and birthing woman. And what else have you got in the works at the moment? Like I said, there's some great menopause resources and menstrual resources. And
Yep, I've got a little e-course that is that I made for women who wouldn't be able to come to the Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy workshop. So it's
great.
called Pregnancy: The Inner Journey. So that's a little
Beautiful.
e-course. And there's also another one you can do separately or together, which is Healing After a Previous Traumatic Birth.
Wow,
So
great.
those things are there. Yep. So birth related. And I've got I can't remember what I call it, but it's like, here we go, hacks for
Mm-hmm.
physiological birth on my website. So lots of little clues on what to do, and 10 moons, as you said, that's all the birth stuff, lots of menstrual stuff
Mm-hmm.
and menopause things. And then if people want to go even deeper, then there's the 4 Seasons journey like you did. And we've also got that now as an online program as well,
Nice.
for those who can't make it to the in-person things. And
Mm.
if you have anybody who knows or lives over in England or Europe, I'll be going over there next year to do the workshops, and
Ooh,
also
beautiful.
2 8-day immersions into shamanic womancraft, one in
Wow.
Glastonbury and one in Brittany in France,
Oh my
and
gosh.
workshops in Ireland, Scotland, Glastonbury, France, Germany, Italy, and I'll finish that 3-month tour in Ibiza.
Oh, wow. Amazing, Jane. That's amazing. Full power. So you can find Jane at janehardwickecollings.com.au and
No,
janehardwickecollings.com.
no AU, just .com.
.com. She's international. And Instagram as well. And there's also the School of Shamanic Womancraft is her school with the 4 Seasons journey if you want to check them out. It was such a pivotal point in my life doing that, and such a foundational point, such perfect timing as I became a mother, just as I was finishing that journey. And so thank you so much for joining us, Jane. Lovely to connect with you.
You
Thank you to
too.
our beautiful listeners. If you have any questions, comments, any feedback, reach out to Jane or I anytime. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you. And Jane, I'd love to start the session with your beautiful invocation. Love to hear it from you. I do usually read out a variation of that. Feels so beautiful to open the space in this way.
My pleasure. Okay. So just settle ourselves and I'll begin. We call the divine feminine, the inner knowing within each of us, feminine wisdom, knowledge, power, and strength. We call the women who have gone before us, mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, wise women, sisters. Be with us. Remind us to trust life. Remind us to trust our bodies. Remind us to trust birth, and remind us to trust death, and remind us to simply be with what is, our awesome selves, powerful, creative, yielding and wielding. And we call the ancient goddesses that women have called on forever, guardians of the gateways. We give thanks for you answering our call. We give thanks for peace and love and joy and harmony. We give thanks for safety, for happiness, for insight, and for fun. And we give thanks to everybody who has supported each of us in being here, and for this place, this space, and the opportunity to share time together. Blessed be.
Blessed be.